Saratov region, 1996. A gang called Otaroski attacked a gypsy woman, but soon became victims of her revenge. The winter of 1996 in the Saratov region was particularly harsh. The working-class village of Stepnoy, located 30 kilometers from the regional center, was gradually turning into a ghost of the Soviet past. The agricultural machinery factory, around which the village was built in the 1960s, stood dead. Workshops with broken windows, rusting equipment, overgrown territory. Of the 3,000 residents who lived here in better times, barely more than 800 remained. Young people left for Saratov, Moscow, and some tried to make their way abroad. Older people remained, along with families without the means to move, and those who had nowhere else to go. The village stretched along the only paved road, which had long since turned into a series of potholes and ruts. On both sides stood 5-story panel buildings, gray, shabby, with peeling plaster and blackened balconies. Between the buildings were vacant lots overgrown with weeds, where goats grazed in the summer and children built snow forts in the winter. On the outskirts was a cluster of garages made of rusty metal and cinder blocks, where men spent more time than at home, repairing ancient Zhigulis and Moskvits, which had long since been turned into construction sets made of spare parts from different cars. Behind the garages began the industrial zone, abandoned warehouses, hangars with collapsed roofs, old transformer booths. It was an area where even local dogs did not venture. Too many dark corners, too many places where one could stumble upon something unpleasant. In winter, the snow here lay black with soot and industrial grime, untouched for months. The only traces were the tracks of stray dogs and the rare footprints of those who walked straight from the bus stop to their homes, saving 10 minutes by cutting across. It was along this road that 21-year-old Leia Demyanova returned home every evening. Formally, she bore the Russian surname of her late father, who died when she was 4, but everyone in the village knew she was a gypsy. Her mother also died early, of tuberculosis, when Leia was 12. The girl was sent to an orphanage in a neighboring district center, from which she ran away 3 times before social services gave up and let her live with a distant relative in Stepnoy. At 16, Leia was left all alone. Her aunt moved in with her son in Volgograd, leaving the girl a 1-room apartment on the first floor of the last house on the street. Leia worked at the only functioning enterprise in the village, the Zarya Sewing Cooperative, where 20 women sewed work clothes for local businesses on ancient industrial machines. They were paid little and irregularly, often in kind, with pieces of fabric that could be sold at the market. But it was at least some work, at least some money. The cooperative was located in a former kindergarten at the opposite end of the village, and every evening Leia returned home alone, because she lived farther away than all the other workers. She was a petite girl with a fragile build, dark hair that she always wore in a tight braid, and brown eyes that revealed the wariness of someone who was used to relying only on herself. Leia had learned to be inconspicuous. She walked quickly, her head down, avoided eye contact with strangers, and gave groups of young men a wide berth. In the 1990s, in the Russian countryside, a woman walking alone after dark had to be very careful, especially if that woman was a gypsy and an orphan, with no relatives who could stand up for her. In the village of Stepnoy, everyone knew the Otaroski gang. It wasn't even a gang in the complete sense of the word, but a group of 4 young men who kept the whole village in fear. The core of the group was the 3 Sinitsyn brothers, Gennady, 28, Viktor, 25, and Alexei, 22. Their father worked as a mechanic at the factory until it closed, then drank himself to death and died of a heart attack. Their mother lived with them in a 2-room apartment, but she was effectively a recluse, afraid to go outside, fearful of her own sons, living on a tiny pension, and trying not to cross their path. The Sinitsyn brothers had never worked anywhere. Gennady served 2 years for hooliganism in the early 90s. Viktor was twice convicted of fighting, but received suspended sentences. Alexei was the youngest and most aggressive, with a psyche that had been shattered in his teenage years by using everything he could get his hands on in those years, from glue to pharmacy drugs. The trio of brothers was joined by Fyodor, nicknamed Baldy, a 30-year-old who lived in a dormitory at a closed factory and got by on odd jobs. He was nicknamed Bald, not because he had no hair. He shaved his head himself with an electric razor, leaving uneven patches and bald spots, but because of his dull, empty expression, as if his brain had been removed. The four spent their days in one of the garages that belonged to the Sinitsyn's deceased father. There they drank cheap vodka, played cards, and sometimes repaired stolen radios and other small appliances for resale. They rarely had any money, so they engaged in petty extortion, taking cash from school children, borrowing from market traders, knowing that no one would dare refuse or demand repayment. Several times, they beat up men who tried to contradict them, and they beat them brutally, methodically, with obvious pleasure. The local police consisted of one district officer and two assistants who preferred not to get involved with the Otaroski, knowing full well that there were no serious charges to bring against them, and that minor altercations would only create problems. The villagers feared and hated them, but kept quiet. It was a time when the law was ineffective, when people were used to solving problems themselves or putting up with them. There was no one to complain to, and it was pointless. The only thing that kept the Otaroski from committing grave crimes was their lack of organization and the real cruelty of professional gangsters. They were more like aggressive degenerates, hooligans for whom violence was entertainment and a way of asserting themselves. The evening of 14th of February 1996 was freezing. The temperature dropped to -20 degrees, the wind drove snow dust through the streets, and visibility was poor. Leia left work around 7 in the evening, wrapped herself in an old sheepskin coat, tied a scarf around her head, and walked home along her usual route. Through the center of the village, past the store, then a turn toward the industrial zone, and straight across the vacant lot to her house. Usually the walk took about 25 minutes at a brisk pace. The Sinitsyn brothers and Lysi spent the day in their garage drinking vodka. By evening they were drunk, but not unconscious, in that dangerous state when alcohol loosens your inhibitions and shuts down what's left of your conscience, but you still have some coordination. Around 7 o'clock, they decided to go for a walk, as Gennady put it, to get some fresh air and stretch their legs. Their path lay toward the industrial zone, where they could smoke in the relative warmth of an old transformer booth, which still retained some heat from the equipment that had recently been operating. Leia walked quickly, her head bowed against the wind. She noticed them when they came around the corner of an abandoned hangar, about 50 meters away from her. 4 silhouettes, swaying, clearly intoxicated. Her heart skipped a beat. She quickened her pace, hoping to slip past without attracting attention. But they noticed her. "Hey, Gypsy," shouted Viktor Sinitsyn, the middle brother, his voice carrying in the frosty air. Leia didn't answer, walking even faster, almost running. "Stop, bitch. We're talking to you." Alexei, the youngest, yelled, and the 4 of them cut her off. They were drunk, but they moved quickly, blocking her way home. After a few seconds, it became clear that she would not be able to escape. Leia stopped and pressed her back against the concrete wall of the warehouse. "Leave me alone, please. I haven't done anything to anyone," she said, trying to speak calmly, even though her hands were shaking. Gennady, the oldest, came closest. He was a large man, broad-shouldered, with the puffy face of an alcoholic and small, angry eyes. "You haven't done anything? I think you owe me. All gypsies owe everyone, that's a well-known fact," he said and laughed. The others joined in. "I don't have any money. None at all. Let me go." Leia reached into her pocket and pulled out a crumpled 10-ruble bill, all she had. "Here, take this." Gennady took the money, looked at it, crumpled it up, and threw it into the snow. "We don't need money. We're bored. We want to have some fun. And you, gypsy girl, are just right for that. What happened next took about 20 minutes. They dragged her into an old hangar where the rusty remains of some equipment lay. They raped her in turn, held her when she tried to escape, and beat her when she screamed. Alexei choked her until she stopped resisting. The bald man was the last. When they were done, Victor wanted to kill her. He suggested strangling her or hitting her on the head with an iron bar. But Gennady stopped him. Why? She won't tell anyone. Who would listen to her? A gypsy orphan, and she won't be able to prove anything. They left her on the floor of the hangar, in a pool of her own blood, her clothes torn, in a state of shock. They left, laughing and talking about how they would have to do it again when they got tired of drinking vodka in the garage. Leia lay there for several hours until she was able to get up. On a frosty night, she could have died of hypothermia, but the hangar partially protected her from the wind, and her body, young and strong despite everything she had been through, held out. Around midnight, Leia was able to get up. She wrapped herself in her torn sheepskin coat and picked up her scarf. Pain pierced her entire body. Her legs were wet with blood, and her face was swollen from the blows. She made her way to her apartment, holding onto the walls of the buildings. Her neighbors did not see her. Everyone in the village stayed at home. The windows were curtained, and no one ventured out into the cold without good reason. At home, Leia undressed, struggled to the bathroom, and stood under the hot water for a long time, trying to wash away the dirt, the blood, the feeling of strange hands on her body. Then she treated her wounds with the green antiseptic that was left in the first aid kit, took all the painkillers she could find, and lay down on the bed. She didn't cry. There were no tears. There was only an empty, scorched feeling inside, and one thought that gradually crystallized into absolute certainty. They would pay for this. On the morning of 15th February, Leia did not go to work. She lay in bed all day, recovering physically and making plans. There was no thought in her head of going to the police. She understood perfectly well that it would be pointless. 4 men against 1 orphaned gypsy girl. No witnesses. The examination had to be done immediately, and more than 12 hours had already passed. And the local police officer would most likely brush it off, or, even worse, go to the Otaroski, and they would find out that she had tried to complain. Then they would definitely kill her. Revenge. Only revenge made sense. But how? She was alone, and there were 4 of them. They were stronger. They feared no one and nothing. Confrontation was out of the question, so she needed to be cunning. She had to make them come to her. She had to take away their advantage. She had to make them helpless, and the punishment had to be such that they understood why they were dying. 3 days later, Leia returned to work. She covered the bruises on her face with a thick layer of foundation and replied to questions by saying that she had fallen on the ice. Her colleagues didn't pry too much. Everyone had their own problems. She worked mechanically, while a plan spun around in her head. At first, she thought about poison. She could get rat poison and mix it into vodka. But how could she get them to drink that particular vodka? They didn't trust anyone, especially after what they had done. She needed something else. The idea came unexpectedly when she overheard a conversation between 2 women on the bus. One complained that she couldn't sleep, and the other advised her to get a strong sleeping pill from the Soviet era. It knocks you out like a log, even if there's an explosion nearby. Sleeping pills. Leia remembered that her deceased aunt had left some medicine in her closet, including several bottles of pills. She returned home and rummaged through the medicine cabinet. Among other things, she found 2 bottles of phenazepam, a potent tranquilizer that was prescribed in Soviet times for severe neurosis and insomnia. Each bottle contained 50 pills. Leia read the instructions. The therapeutic dose was 1 or 2 pills per night. An overdose caused deep sleep, confusion, and, in severe cases, coma. But what if she dissolved 20 or 30 pills in a bottle of wine? That would be enough to knock out 4 adult men. She just had to get them to drink it. For the next 2 weeks, Leia watched the thugs as they reconstructed their schedule. They showed up at their garage every day around 2 in the afternoon and stayed until late in the evening. Sometimes they went somewhere, but they always came back. On Fridays, they usually got especially drunk. Leia decided to act on Friday, 7th March, 3 weeks after the rape. On the morning of 7th March, she didn't go to work, saying she was sick. She went to the market and bought 3 bottles of cheap fortified wine called Solnsedar. Sweet, thick, with a strong aroma that could mask any aftertaste. At home, she crushed 100 phenazepam tablets into a fine powder, divided it into 3 parts, carefully opened the bottles, poured the powder into each one, and shook them for several minutes until the powder was completely dissolved. The wine became slightly cloudy, but not enough to be noticeable. She recapped the bottles and wrapped electrical tape around their necks to make them look unopened. Now the most challenging part was delivering the wine. She couldn't just show up and offer it to them. They would immediately suspect something was up. She needed a cover story, a story that would explain why she was bringing them alcohol. Leia put on the most revealing outfit she had, a short skirt and a tight-fitting blouse, and applied bright, provocative makeup. She took the bag with 3 bottles and went to the garage. Around 5 in the evening, she approached their garage. Inside, she could hear voices, laughter, and the radio. She knocked on the metal door. The conversations died down. "Who's there?" Gennady shouted. "It's me, Leia. Remember me?" Pause. Then the sound of the bolt being moved. The door opened. Gennady stood in the doorway. Behind him were the other 3, all with bottles of beer in their hands, all staring at her. "What do you want?" Gennady asked, but there was already interest in his voice. Leia forced herself to smile. "I came to apologize for how I behaved back then. I shouldn't have resisted and screamed. You just wanted to have fun. I thought about it and realized I was being stupid, so I decided to make amends." She took the bottles out of her bag. "I brought wine. Good, strong wine. Let's drink together, and I'll show you I don't hold a grudge." The 4 exchanged glances. It was so unexpected that they didn't know what to say immediately. Then Victor laughed. "Well, you gypsy, go for it. You showed up on your own, and with wine too. Maybe you really have come to your senses." Alexei reached for the bottles, took one, and held it up to the light. "It's not poisoned?" Leia shrugged. "I'll drink first if you're afraid." Gennady weighed the situation for a few seconds, then smiled. "Come in. Since you've come to make peace, we'll make peace." They dragged her into the garage. It was warm from a homemade stove, smoky, and smelled of alcohol and machine oil. The bald man slammed the door shut. Leia felt her heart pounding, but she kept her face calm and smiled. Gennady opened the first bottle and poured it into faceted glasses. "Come on, gypsy. Drink first. Show us you're not trying to poison us." Leia took a glass and took a big gulp. The wine was cloyingly sweet, slightly bitter, but the bitterness was lost in the overall taste. She passed the glass back. "See? It's normal wine." The 4 of them drank it all at once, according to Russian tradition. Then they had another round. The first bottle was gone quickly. "You're not as stupid as I thought," said Gennady, looking at Leia. "Maybe we'll have a good time after all. Only this time you won't struggle, right?" Leia nodded, continuing to smile. Inside, she was shaking with disgust and hatred, but she held on. "I won't. I promise." Victor opened a second bottle. They drank, snacking on the remains of bread and sausage, talking, becoming more and more uninhibited. Alexei was already groping Leia's leg, and Baldy was smiling stupidly as he looked at her. 20 minutes after they started drinking the second bottle, Baldy was the first to start nodding off. "Something's messing with me," he muttered, and laid his head on the table. Victor tried to stand up, swayed, and grabbed the edge of the workbench. "What the? There's something wrong with the wine." But he couldn't finish his sentence and slumped to the floor, leaning his back against the wall. His eyes closed on their own. Gennady and Alexei realized what was happening at the same time. Gennady tried to grab Leia, but his hands wouldn't obey him. His thoughts were floating. The bitch! She poisoned it! He took a step toward her, but his legs buckled, and he fell to his knees. Alexei crawled to the door and tried to push the bolt, but his fingers couldn't grip the metal. A minute later, he collapsed next to the door and stopped moving. Leia stood in the middle of the garage, looking at the 4 sprawled men. They were all breathing, but they were in a deep, almost comatose sleep. The phenazepam had worked quickly and powerfully, just as she had expected. Now the most crucial part began. She had a few hours while they slept. That should be enough. She left the garage, looking around. It was already dark, and the garage area was deserted. She returned home, took a large bag she had already filled with everything she needed: rope, electrical tape, a large, well-sharpened kitchen knife, plastic wrap, and rubber gloves. She returned to the garage. The men were not moving. They were breathing deeply and evenly. Leia began by tying each of them up. She tied their hands behind their backs with rope, then their legs, then tied them to the iron pipes and posts in the garage so that they could not move when they woke up. She taped their mouths shut with several layers of wide electrical tape. She worked quickly, methodically, without unnecessary movements. When she was done, all 4 were securely immobilized, each sitting or lying by their support, unable to move. Then, she just waited. She sat on an old chair in the corner of the garage, watching them and waiting for them to wake up. The stove was slowly cooling down, and the garage was getting cooler. About 2 hours passed before the first one began to stir. It was Victor. He groaned, tried to open his eyes, tried to move his arms, and realized he couldn't. His eyes flew open, filled with horror. He tried to scream, but the duct tape muffled the sound to an indistinct moan. One by one, the others began to wake up. Gennady, Alexei, Lysi. They all experienced the same thing: confusion turning into panic when they realized their situation. They jerked their arms, tried to free themselves, moaned, and stared at Leia with wide eyes. She stood up and moved closer so that everyone could see her. "Do you remember what you did to me 3 weeks ago?" she asked quietly. The 4 froze, staring at her. "You thought I would just put up with it, that I wouldn't tell anyone, that I would forget. Maybe you've almost forgotten yourselves. For you, it was just entertainment, right? A way to kill boredom." She walked over to Gennady, crouched down in front of him, and looked into his eyes. "But I haven't forgotten, and I won't forgive you. Ever." Leia took a knife out of her bag. At the sight of the blade, the 4 began to twitch with renewed vigor, moaning, trying to scream through their taped mouths. She walked over to Gennady. "You were the first, so I'll start with you." Gennady shook his head, his eyes filled with animal terror. Leia cut his pants and pulled them off along with his underwear. He tried to close his legs, but they were tied and fastened to an iron rack. What she did next took several minutes. Gennady tried to lose consciousness from the pain, but she hit him in the face, not letting him slip into darkness. When she was done, she put the cut-off pieces in a plastic bag nearby. Gennady was in shock. His eyes rolled back, and foamy saliva mixed with blood from his torn lips flowed from his mouth through the duct tape. Then she moved on to Victor, then to Alexei, then to Bald. She did the same thing to each of them. They couldn't move, couldn't scream, could only watch and feel. When she finished with the last one, all 4 were in a state of deep shock, some losing consciousness and coming to, but the blood loss was not yet critical. Leia bandaged the wounds with rags so they wouldn't bleed out too quickly. She gathered all 4 severed parts and placed them in a metal bowl. She left the garage. It was dark and cold outside. the stars shining brightly in the black sky. She walked a few meters to the place where a pack of stray dogs always roamed. There were 5 or 6 of them, living among the garages, feeding on garbage and whatever the compassionate residents brought them. The dogs smelled the blood immediately. They approached cautiously, sniffing. Leia poured the contents of the bowl onto the snow. The dogs pounced, growling and snapping at each other. Within a minute, there was nothing left on the snow but dark spots. Leia returned to the garage. She tore the tape off Gennady's mouth. He wheezed, trying to speak, but could only make incoherent sounds. She dragged him to the garage door so that he could see outside through the crack, where the dogs had just feasted. "Did you see that?" she asked. Gennady closed his eyes, tears streaming down his face. "Did you see what they ate? Those were your last chances to be men, yours and your brothers. Now you are nothing. You are worse than dead. You are living corpses, castrated, not even considered valuable by dogs." She went back inside and looked at the 4 of them. They were all conscious, all looking at her. "I could kill you. It would have been mercy, but I won't. You will live. You will live and remember every day what you have lost. You will see pity or disgust in people's eyes when they find out what happened to you. You will wake up every morning and remember this night. This is your punishment. Not death. Life." Leia gathered her things, wiped the knife, and put everything in her bag. She took off her gloves and threw them into the stove along with the bloody rags. The fire was still smoldering, and everything quickly charred. She looked once more at the 4 bound, mutilated men. Then she threw open the garage door. Cold air rushed in, and walked off into the night. In the morning, one of the owners of the neighboring garages, who had come to get a tool, found them. Seeing the open door and hearing moans, he looked inside and froze. He called an ambulance and the police. When the doctors and investigators arrived, the scene was so shocking that several members of the task force ran outside to vomit. All 4 were hospitalized. They survived, although Gennady was on the verge of death several times from blood poisoning. The investigation began immediately. They questioned all the village's residents and checked all possible connections, but the Otaroski refused to say who did it. They remained silent, or replied that they did not remember when asked any questions. The investigators could not understand why the victims did not want to help find the criminal. Only after several weeks did it become clear. They were afraid. They were fearful of the person who could do such a thing to them, afraid that if they named the person, they would really be killed next time. Leia was questioned as a witness, but very formally. She said she was home alone and did not go anywhere all evening. There was no evidence to the contrary. No one saw her near the garages. Neighbors confirmed that the light in her window was on all evening. She threw the knife into the river. She burned the clothes. She bought the rope and electrical tape with cash at a market in another neighborhood. No receipts. The pills were old, without a prescription in her name. No direct evidence. The case reached a dead end. The official version remained unknown. Unofficially, rumors quickly spread throughout the village. Many guessed who did it and why, but no one spoke out loud. Moreover, public opinion was strange. Not sympathy for the mutilated Otaroski, but rather satisfaction. Everyone knew what those 4 had been doing in the village. Everyone feared and hated them. And someone had finally put them in their place. Cruel, monstrous, but fair in its own way. A month later, Leia quit her job at the cooperative, packed her things, and left the village. No one knew where she went. She just disappeared. The Sinitsyn brothers and Lysi were discharged from the hospital and returned home. They changed completely. They became quiet and withdrawn, avoiding people. Gennady hanged himself 6 months later. Victor drank himself to death and died of cirrhosis 3 years later. Alexei went mad and was sent to a psychiatric hospital. Lysi disappeared. He left the village and was never seen again. This story was never officially disclosed. In the archives of the Regional Department of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, the case is marked unsolved. However, everyone who worked on the investigation understood perfectly well who the perpetrator was, but it was impossible to prove. And, to be honest, there was no particular desire to do so. Some crimes go unpunished not because the perpetrators are not found, but because society tacitly accepts the justice of what has been done. The story of Leia and the Otaroski gang has become something of an urban legend in the Saratov region. A terrible, cruel story, but one that teaches us that any violence will sooner or later come back to the perpetrator, sometimes in the most horrific form.